Thank you for joining us. We are here at the Mindset, episode 10. We are now in double digits. China, you are our official descendant or ascent into double digits. I'm your host, Christopher Feldner, training architect with Ukeri Systems. And with us, we have a special guest to talk to today. China, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'd love to. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on here today. My name is China, Miss China to my sweet kiddos that I work with at school. I'm a kindergarten to fifth grade behavioral special education teacher, which just means that I kind of get the best of all worlds. I work with kindergarten all the way up to fifth grade, ranging needs and disability areas. I am a special education teacher, and I'm located in North Dakota. So, like I said, I'm excited to be here.
So what is the weather like right now in North Dakota?
You know, it's not bad. I would say probably right now it's like 65 or 70. We had like a torrential downpour last night. It was crazy. We got so much rain. All the streets were flooded, but right now it's nice again. So can't complain.
I would love to have 65-degree weather right now. It is like yesterday on the way home, it was 95. And it stayed. Now, when I was in Fargo, North Dakota, I did a debriefing training there. Maybe it was less than a month ago. It was actually hot there. Like I've never been there. So,
It was 90s for probably like 3 or 4 weeks in Fargo and Grand Forks for a while, which is where I'm at.
Yeah, I've never been there where it hasn't been winter, so that was new for me.
It's nice. We get nice weather sometimes.
Yeah. So one thing you left out is you also have some social media platforms.
Yes, I do. So, like I said, China, Miss China. Some people know me as Especially Sped on Instagram or TikTok, Facebook. I'm dabbling a little bit with YouTube right now. But yeah. So on there, I just help to provide different behavioral strategies and tips and tricks and real life stories to help hopefully inspire and motivate teachers in their own classrooms to reach as many kids as possible. Because kids are at the bottom of everything that we do, right? We have to be
Absolutely. So I had to borrow someone's Instagram account to look everything up because I haven't been on social media in about 3 years now.
Yeah.
So when people are like, oh, you got to check out her Instagram channel and all, I'm like, I don't have the way to get on there. So I had to borrow an account to look in, and you have a lot of really helpful stuff on there. But what I really liked about, I felt like a lot of people post things on YouTube or things like that of, helpful hints for this and that. But what I liked about the approach that you were taking with a lot of the Instagram posts around helping children in the classrooms is it backed the philosophy that we teach with comfort versus control. Like without you even saying it, like a lot of things you were talking about, I was like, I wish we had like that clip so we could be like, this is what we mean, and just like show it up on the screen.
Yeah.
So I started at the bottom. So I went at the very bottom to see like how your channels progressed and the different things over time. So one thing I would have talked to you about that struck my eye was going to go way back in time to July 30th of 2018.
Oh my God.
So you went over a structured conversation activity, and listening to you talk about it, I was like, that's basically what I do when I do an introduction when I train. Because, you start out in the day and people don't want to talk or they feel uncomfortable, especially when you got multiple organizations and schools together. It gets them talking, just asking questions that are fun, but also from my point of view, helps me learn about them. When I ask, what are your 2 favorite superpowers and why? Like, what would you choose? That tells me a lot about people. Sometimes people say things are pretty consistent, like, I wish I could read minds and I wish I was invisible. But then as you get to know them, they like gossip or they like to know what's going on and things like that. So tell me about the structured conversation activity. Like, how do you utilize that with your kids, and how's that help?
Can you remind me of what the post was? I feel like I can't even remember exactly. Was it like a quote that I posted? Was it a video?
It was a video. So it was something you had, like, it almost looked like fortune cookie papers with like little questions on it. And you talked about helping folks feel comfortable communicating.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, um, I do a couple different things. So, not only am I a special education teacher for kindergarten to fifth grade, but when I was in at the end of my college career and then into teaching, I started helping this one organization for new Americans. And so that specific activity I not only used in my like special education classroom, but I also used it in that type of setting as well. So these are new Americans that came from tons of different countries seeking refuge for a safer home. And so a big part of it was there's so much discomfort with not knowing everybody somewhere, like you had said. There's so much discomfort not knowing how people are going to respond to what maybe your answer is. And just behind not knowing who people are with when you work with them. And so that was like the easiest activity I ever made. I just printed out like random questions, all different questions. I had a couple different sets because I had like more adult type questions that were like, what country are you from? How many kids do you have? Have you been married before? Different things like that. What's your religion? And then for kids, I have different ones too. Also for the adults, I'd throw in some kind of silly or different questions because it's important to not only be able to answer like the basic factual information about yourself, but it's equally important to be able to answer different questions that cause you to think a little bit deeper, right? Like that cause you to think, who am I as a person? What do I really enjoy? What makes me happy? And part of learning a new language, in this specific instance, when I had created this activity, is learning how to be able to express yourself in that different language outside of just the factual information. Because if you have kids, what job you have, if you're married, that doesn't define who you are as a person. And so I think it's important to be able to get those things out. So I just went on a Word document. I typed out all these questions. I folded them up and I put them in this little cup. It was honestly people's like favorite activity because I think as much as people don't like to talk about themselves, when they're given an opportunity where they have to answer a question, I think people like that community of being able to share who they are. And so we'd pass around this little jar. They'd be excited to see what question they had. They would read it and answer it. And it just kind of developed this community and understanding and way to learn and connect with other people. And I saw how well that worked for adults and how much they loved that. And so I also transferred it kind of into my special education classroom, specifically in my social skills group. So I do a lot of different social skills, social emotional learning type grouping. I take all of the groups in our school just because that's kind of my wheelhouse. I love it. I think that's the coolest thing that we can teach kids is like how to be successful citizens in our society. And so I have tons of groups all throughout the day. I only do 15-minute groups. It's so fun. It's so beautiful just to watch how these kids develop. But when they start in a group, chances are they don't know every kid in the group. And so it's, they're kind of silly. They're kind of embarrassed. And so these types of questions just help kids connect and see similarities and differences. We even dive deeper into questions like, what is something that has made you feel happy before? What is something that's made you feel scared before? And I think those are really telling questions that help us just connect as humans. And that's what everybody wants, just to feel like they've connected with somebody. So yeah, that's a great reference. I actually forgot that I even posted about that activity.
You mean you remember that from however many years ago?
Yeah. That's crazy. 5 years ago.
Another one that struck me that I really enjoyed was that particularly stuck with me is the 4-step apology board. Because I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on, treating people well, and when someone has had an emotional outburst, behavioral outburst, and then after the fact they're being the consequence or trying to help them learn and whatnot. But what we don't always do a good job of is helping people in general know how to make amends. So I really appreciated seeing that. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us what the 4-step apology board is about.
So I am a big believer. It's a big foundation in my classroom. I was thinking through things over the last few weeks. I'm doing these chats with Miss China right now just to kind of help other teachers. And I was trying to think of like, what do I think is the foundation of a classroom, right? Like if you want to run an effective classroom, what are the things that need to be your core beliefs? And I had just kind of like narrowed it down. And I think consistency, being consistent in what you do, right? So if that means a big behavior happens and whatever, you follow the plan, you follow what you're supposed to, you do the restorative steps that are so important in cases like this, which is what we'll talk about in just a second. Second chances, because everybody in life messes up. And I think the moment we start holding grudges and we start saying, oh, well, they did this, like they're not going to get a chance at this, that's when we have problems, right? We have to see people, as humans that make mistakes, and it's okay to give second chances. And then relationships. Like if you don't have those three things, you are pretty much SOL in whatever you're doing. And so those are kind of the foundation of what we do in our classroom. And so something that I take very seriously is, yes, kids have big behaviors. And, you know, as we're working through those and we're trying to figure out how we're going to help them be the most successful, they're still going to have mistakes that happen. They're still going to do things that are going to somewhat, just kind of tear apart a relationship or make people feel scared or sad or uncomfortable. So how can we help them restore those relationships? Because truthfully, that's the skill that's going to help them later in life. You get in a fight with your spouse, you get in a fight with your colleague, you have to be able to restore those relationships, or that's where things get uncomfortable and stressful and a whole bunch of other underlying things can come out. And so we really stress the restorative approach in my classroom. And I'd always thought back, or I'd watched different instances where teachers would ask kids to apologize and kids would be like, I'm sorry. And then teachers would say, no, you're sorry for what? And trying to dig out this like long apology. And I was thinking, why are kids doing this? Part of me wonders if some of these kids haven't even seen like a full apology ever take place. How do they know what to say? Whatever. Also, how uncomfortable is it to have to apologize in the first place? Knowing you messed up, chances are you probably feel bad for what you did. And then it's like this uncomfortable piece where people are making others maintain eye contact and say the right thing. And it's supposed to be long enough and they don't have to forgive your apology. Like there's just so many pieces to it that I think the best thing we can do is help them through it, right? Have something that's consistent, have something that's predictable, and then have something that can be modeled to them so it's not so uncomfortable when they first get started. If we have a model and we can help them through it, it becomes more natural as they get used to it. And so I started this 4-step apology wall in my classroom, and it just kind of goes through 4 different steps. I'm sorry for, this was wrong. In the future, I will, and then do you forgive me? So they would say like, I'm sorry for hitting you. This is wrong because it hurt you. In the future, I will ask for space instead. Do you forgive me? So they kind of go through and they think of all the parts that they would have to fill out. I do allow a couple different ways depending on the kids. Some kids are really anxious and they're nervous and this is uncomfortable. And so for some kids, I let them write out the whole thing. I have these like little templates where they can write out with an expo marker. They can take it, they can read it, and it's a little bit more comfortable. And some kids will just read the wall and work through it with the adult. And that's really kind of transformed how we do apologies in my classroom. And it helps me as well, because I can't always be involved in every situation. So I think It helps paras and the other adults that work in my room feel a little bit more comfortable with guiding that type of restorative practice.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that's kind of key. Is it's almost in the teacher or the staff, whatever type of organization it is, it's almost like our offense or frustration or anger about the situation, sorry is not good enough for us. Like we want to dig like, how sorry are you? You should like prove to me you're sorry. But not realizing that if you make it hard to apologize, why would I apologize? Right? Because even if I don't feel like it's sincere for whatever reason, you're still modeling how to accept an apology. And the more that they feel like they can apologize, then the more willing, just people in general, will be more willing to apologize. So I think that's a really good thing that you have going there with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hardest part is I think sometimes teachers, without even knowing it, they're not even aware of what's going on. They're holding these grudges because they're like, kids shouldn't be allowed to do this. They shouldn't be disrespectful. They shouldn't have this. And that's where we have to reframe our mindset so much because they're right. Kids shouldn't be disrespectful. They shouldn't be allowed to do this. But there's a reason that those things are happening, right? Like there is literally something that behavior is always communicating. And on top of that, we don't know what these kids have seen or modeled to them outside of the school environment, but generally those swear words, those nasty things, that doesn't come from not seeing it somewhere else.
Right.
And so that's kind of the thing we have to try and keep in mind in those moments, I think.
Well, and also, we shouldn't kid ourselves and act like we never do those things. How many times do people at the job get angry and yell or curse or, whatever it may be? It's almost like I'm going to expect you, with the difficulties that you're dealing with, to maintain better behavior and self-control than I can. It's a weird standard. Yeah, it's a weird standard with that.
And I've always said in my classroom, I feel I kind of get the side where I can have a little bit more empathy for the situation, only because when my kids become frustrated and escalated, they're special education students, right? So a lot of times they come down for like a calm down break in my classroom. They use the tools that we have in my room to try and help them work through that. And in the classroom, what they see prior to that is swearing or maybe flipping a table or throwing things. So it's like, you're going to let him do that, and then he's just going to leave, and then they're going to do this, and they're going to come right back. They don't see that whole like escalation cycle of the kid getting escalated, coming down, getting escalated, coming down, getting escalated, crying, feeling so bad for the things that they did, wanting to make things better, wanting to be back in class, not wanting to act like that. I think when you see that side of a kid and how badly they want to do well, and they just are just lacking those skills at this point in their life, you have a whole different side of empathy for them. And I honestly wish sometimes we could just have like a little snippet so all teachers could see that piece of it, because in a way, I think it's really beautiful to see how badly kids just want to do the things that they want to do, and they want to do it in a way that pleases other people. And it's really touching.
Well, the great thing is about the age group you're working with is they are sponges. So they're not just soaking up everything that you're formally teaching in terms of, life skill or, math or reading, whatever it is, but also behavior, how you interact with people, what a relationship like, all the facets when things are going good, when things are not going good, and how to recover from that. Like, young children are a sponge. And it's like we talk about with neurons and neural pathways. A lot of times you can make the biggest impact with the younger that you work with because of that, versus us who are older and allegedly have all of our brain parts fully developed, right? To some degree, right? So,
and if you ever want to know how you're acting or what kids think about you, all you have to do is ask them and they'll tell you. So that's the best part about it, I think.
Yep. No filter of I shouldn't say this or yep. It's just, okay, there it is. So let me ask you, what brought you to Ukeru? Like, tell me about that journey.
Yeah, so I'll be totally honest on this. We were getting Ukeru to our school district, and we had always used ProAct, and the thought was we would use, I didn't know at the time, we had used ProAct, and then the thought was maybe Ukeru was going to come in and kind of replace ProAct, and all we had heard is Ukeru uses pads, and so in my head, I'm thinking it's like very much like a SWAT team approach, right? I was like reading about the use of pads, not Ukeru specifically, but like pads and a SWAT team approach and how that like impacts kids and the trauma it can have on kids and whatever else. And I was like, I can't believe our school district is doing this. I was so stressed about it. And I'm the type of person where I'm not going to go in and say, no, we shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to learn more about it, and then I'm going to tell them. So I was like, how am I going to know more about it unless I become a trainer? I need to get trained in this so I know what I don't stand for. And then I can let the district know like how truly harmful this was. So I go to this training, and I was probably a little bit of a stinker in that training because I had these questions that I was asking because I knew people were going to ask these questions. And I wanted to know like what the actual philosophy was behind Ukeru and what they would do and what the answer was for it. And I was so surprised. Like, I went to this training and I was fully, you could ask my whole team at school what I was thinking about Ukeru prior to going, and I was like anti-Ukeru. There is no way we're going to have to implement this in our schools. I'm not for it. And I went, and I was so drastically changed. My mind was drastically changed. I felt like it kind of embodied everything that I personally felt or like my philosophies as a teacher. And it really opened my eyes to things. And I liked the other part I really liked about Ukiru was how much like brain science there is behind it. I feel like there's so much more brain science behind a lot of things that we're doing in education right now. The science of reading, letters training, things like that. We're really looking at the brain and how it impacts what we're doing and reading and different things. So then
Yeah.
having this connection where it's looking at the impact the brain has on the body and how, different things can form and neural pathways can form and how so much change still can be made was really, really interesting. The science behind it all just gives another layer of perspective for those kiddos that we're working with that really need this type of support. So that's how it started. I was trained as a trainer. I was really skeptical. We got pads in my room. Now pretty much my whole school personally, since I believe quite strongly in Ukiru, is trained in Ukiru. We have pads in quite a few different classrooms or different locations just for when we need them. And it's been great. I was skeptical, I would say, about the pads and how kids would handle them, just because they're new, and I have kids that would love to body slam each other and whatever else. But they do really become like just a part of your classroom. Like kids are making sports with them. They're using them as lap pads. They're taking nap breaks on them. Whatever it is, the Ukiru pads are just always embedded in what we're doing. And so, yeah, it's been a neat 2 years of kind of just developing it. And now it's part of our classroom. That's all it is. And kids know those pads are to keep everybody safe. It doesn't matter how it is, it keeps people safe. And it's been really neat.
Yeah. And it basically becomes furniture. When you're not using it for any kind of aggression, it's just furniture, basically. It's another part of the environment. Something you said in your trainer spotlight interview with us, you said that you like the de-escalation strategies. And the reason I want to ask you about that is because sometimes I just had a question recently in a training I did. Well, we're used to, when we go through de-escalation, there's very specific things that you say at each part. So with that not being there, like what was it about the de-escalation piece that appealed to you?
I think because it's so realistic. I think when you are kind of pinpointing what should happen at what times and having super specific either go-to statements or things to do, that's not reality because every kid is so drastically different. And so there were just so many different de-escalation ideas, so many that I personally use in my classroom on the daily, that it just seemed like a more realistic approach. And I think the thing that's hard with working with kids that have challenging behaviors is that it's not like you go into a classroom and you just know what to do, because you don't. So much is trial and error, so much is experience, so much is seeing somebody that you look up to model what it looks like. And that's okay. There isn't ever a perfect answer. Even for me, when I get new students, I don't know that student. So yeah, I'm trying every different de-escalation strategy there is out there, but that doesn't mean I'm going to find the one that works in that day. And that's okay. But you do have to have a big bank of strategies and ideas to try and start working through those so you can figure out what works best for a kid. And so I think that's probably what I liked, is that there were so many ideas. Another thing I really liked about the actual Ukiru training is there's just a lot of like stories in it. And the stories, I think, are what hit home for people. When you can hear different stories about how things go or how Ukiru worked, or just stories about trauma and kids and what is happening out there in the world, you find different connections in your own experiences that you can pull in and just...
Yeah, because what we go over with the bowling point, right? I don't know that people always realize that that's based also on what we talk about with all the brain pieces from earlier. Because me as a staff, as a person trying to de-escalate someone else, I'm also going to be somewhere in there, right? So I may not be fully up in my forebrain to say all the right things at the right moments. And just knowing yourself and that, different people, they can have someone screaming, yelling, throwing things coming towards them, and they can maintain enough of, their brocus area to talk like they should. Then some staff are going to be like, calm down, calm down. The next thing you know, the kid's like, don't tell me to, then it just makes it, go further. So it, I'm glad that you pick up on that piece with it.
About Ukero too, I feel like versus other trainings is it's such a teamwork approach. And I feel like they really stress that. And I think that's probably the neatest part about like the actual like physical piece of the training is that the whole hope is that you'll practice those things and you'll get used to how you work with a team. And you, in that case, you kind of figure out what your team's strengths and weaknesses are. Like I can tell you right off the bat, we have a really, really strong crisis team. We work very well together. We've been working together for a while now. And we just know there's an adult or two that get a little bit more escalated and they'll talk a lot. And sometimes it can cause a kid to bubble up a little bit more. And so at those times, we might ask that staff member to go grab something or to step out just for a second and say, why don't you take a few minutes? We can handle this right now. And that's just knowing your team, and that's where you have that nice kind of backbone to rely on to help you through that is you have a team when you're doing it. It's not like a one-man show, which is helpful, I think, and necessary in those more crisis situations.
Something else you mentioned was the importance of debriefing, using debriefing. Because I would say that's probably one of the weakest areas we encounter a lot of times. Either people don't have a debriefing process or they basically do the mandatory one sheet thing that you got to do for licensing and they think that's a debriefing. So how would you describe debriefing and how's it been important for where you work?
Debriefing is different, I think, in every incident. The nice thing is I'm a little bit of a data hound. I really like data. I think you need data to be able to adjust and change and adapt and make things better. And if you don't have data you can refer back to and look at incidents and recall on, then how are you ever going to make a change that's best for students? And so I actually have these like digital data forms that we fill out for literally every incident that ever takes place. So we have it all located in one place. And the best part about that is if we haven't debriefed yet and somebody is filling out this form isn't only filled out by me, it's filled out by the person that was working most closely to the specific incident that took place. They're the ones that fill that out. But the best part about that is the bottom asks about debriefing that takes place with the student and debriefing that takes place with the staff. And because it's there, we cannot fill out those questions until we've actually debriefed and talked about it. And so that's the nice part is I might not even have known an incident takes place. I come back in my classroom, I notice somebody is there helping with a student and they'll say, hey, I got this part filled out. The student's starting to calm down. When are we going to have time to debrief about this so I can finish filling this out, whatever. And so that just kind of pushes us to make sure that we always do it. I think in smaller incidents, debriefing doesn't have to be something that's chaotic and sitting down for 45 minutes and talking through it, but I think it's important to touch base. The other thing that I think is really important is that you can have a debriefing with the student and you can talk through. Debriefing with the student is equally important and it doesn't have to be like drug out. So just talking about what happened, talking about how the behavior was, talking about what they could do maybe differently the next time. I think role playing that, it's really, really fun. It's a way to get kids to go to a certain place that they maybe won't when they're escalated. So when they're practicing it when they're regulated can help them in the future. And then hopefully getting them back on track and back in class because we don't want to spend 2 hours debriefing with a kid and then they're out of class for 2 hours. That's not a win either. Plus you lose their attention, whatever else. The other thing that I think is important is when you're debriefing with staff members, we need to be mindful of who's around us when we're debriefing. Only the need to know people need to know what you're talking about. And we have to be careful not to debrief when the student can hear or is close because a lot of times we say things that maybe we're still emotional about, we're still wondering about, we want to ask questions about, and there's nothing worse than hearing somebody talk about you, and we're not doing it in a malicious way or to hurt anybody, but emotions can come off, and when kids hear that's not good for a relationship either. So I think making sure you work on that with the student first, getting them back in class, debriefing about what has happened, talk about whatever plan it is you have going forward, and then making time to debrief as staff, then to talk through it, talking about what happened, how you felt, if you're okay, anybody got injured, maybe what could we do differently? Who could they have asked for help? And kind of go from there.
So you go and you become a new care trainer. That's one step, right? And then you got to go back and try to convince everyone else who might be having the same skepticism you had or worse, right? So
Yeah, I
what
was
was
the only trainer for a while in my school, probably like 5 months, 4 months. And then paras in my classroom were actually really excited about it. So it started with paras in my classroom.
so how did you go about changing mindsets with staff that were maybe more resistant?
I just talked about the philosophy behind it. I think everybody thinks um, it's all one thing or the other, and it doesn't have to be, right? Like, this is just another tool in our toolbox. And heaven knows we don't have a ton of supports in schools. So if we can get more tools in our toolbox to help better support these kids that have more severe trauma, why are we not doing this? The other piece in the part that I referenced a lot was our little like training manual. And I would go straight into that manual and I would talk about so many different things. I think the rat study is like so interesting with, the mouse cage and or the rat cage and the mouse hair. And there's just so many pieces in there that are nice to refer back to, so many visuals about the brain and different neural pathways forming that you can directly see. And so we'd be talking about something and I would say, oh my gosh, we talked about that in Ukiru. I need to show you this. And that's just another way that I would continue talking about how it works. I think the biggest thing is stressing that the pads are there to keep you safe. They're not meant to be traumatic or scary. They are a part of your classroom. And so it's not something that you just whip out of the cabinet when a kid is having a behavior, because they're not meant to trigger kids. They're meant to be there as a safety thing. And they are a safety thing. For a lot of my kids, when they're mad, they'll build a tent with the Ukiru pads and they'll go directly under it. And there it's a safety measure. But then when that kid is ready to hit somebody, they see it in a different safety measure as well. And so I think just practicing what you truly believe and embedding it in what you do, people eventually see the effects of it and they want to come along with.
Now, kind of taking all this in, thinking about comfort versus control, I think one of a more recent post that I liked was we were talking about students destroying the classroom, right? Because you showed one video, I remember you showed a tour, like your classroom, it's wonderfully set up. You've got all kinds of decorations. It's warm. Like it's a cool classroom, cooler than the ones I had growing up. But then you also address that. Don't they throw or destroy stuff in a classroom? Then you would show your classroom and everything's just like everywhere. And you're like, yeah, sometimes they do. I bring this post up because something I hear a lot when I train, particularly in schools, is they'll say, you'll go in some classrooms and they are more decorated, but then you'll go in some and there's literally nothing. It's just blank walls and everything. And when you ask why, it's always the same thing. Well, if we put anything up, they just tear it down. So how would you address someone who says that?
I hear it all the time, all the time on social media. People are always commenting that. And they're right. Kids are going to tear things down sometimes. But I think there is something to be said about knowing that their teacher, who cares so much about them, is taking time to set up this classroom for them, right? I worked at Red Lobster for a long time and I have all these books and I would buy new books and the kids would say, oh my gosh, you need to get this book and this book and this book. And I'd say, yep, I will. I work at Red Lobster. I'll use some of that money to go buy a book for our classroom. And eventually kids were saying like, oh, Miss China works at Red Lobster, so she can buy more books for our classroom, which is just a way of them feeling like they're cared for because I'm going to do something like that. But I have kids input in how I set up my classroom. I have kids input on how I move things around in my classroom because the whole hope is that these kids know that we care so much about them, that we want to have a space that's comfy and cozy and calming, but also has a little bit of their input as well. And so I think when kids know how much you care and that you're doing this for them, the mindset shifts a little bit, right? I have not ever, maybe one time, have never had a kid destroy my classroom and then not feel bad about it because they care about you as a person, and they're mad and they're frustrated and those things happen. And in the moment they're wanting it to happen, but once it's done, they're like, man, why did I do that? So many other kids use this. I like using this. Why did I do this? So yes, I think if you don't want anything in your classroom and you want it to be cold and you feel like kids are going to rip things down, that's how it is, right? But they're just going to find other things to throw or destroy or whatever. But when you take the time to invest this in your classroom, it creates an entirely different culture and community in your classroom where they're not going to do the things that you always think they're going to. It's wild because, like I said, I work with kids with very challenging behaviors, and it is not very often that it happens where they actually destroy my classroom to that extent. It does happen, but the number of times that it doesn't happen far outweighs the number of times that it does happen. And so I think that has something to be said about having a classroom that's set up.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes when I hear arguments around this, they'll say things like, well, you can't just do that in the real world, right? Well, one, they need extra supports, right? That's why they're with us. Two, I know a lot of adults that will put some holes in walls and doors when they get angry, throw things, break things. But, it wouldn't work if it wouldn't work if their family members like, you can't do that in the real world, because people do a lot of things.
These kids aren't born and just all of a sudden destroying rooms. They're not born just doing those things. And so it's wild because sometimes you'll see kids do things and you're thinking, where did they see somebody else do that? Because they didn't just think of that on their own, right? And so that's the part that I always try to remind people of is that when kids start doing these things, once again, it is not appropriate. It is not respectful. Everybody gets so fixated on, well, they're being disrespectful. That's inappropriate. They shouldn't be allowed to do that in schools. That's like the three things that people really, really get fixated on. And then they also fixate on what's going to be the consequence, right? I once went to a training by Dr. Scott Walls, or maybe just Scott Walls. I can't remember his name. He talks a lot about oppositional defiant behaviors, behavior planning, things like that. And he talked about how once we get older, right, there are consequences to things. If you speed, you're going to get a speeding ticket. If you rob a bank, you're going to go to jail. Well, when a person's going to rob a bank, do they know whether or not if they get in trouble, they're going to go to jail? Yeah, they know the consequence if they get caught is they're going to go to jail. Are they still going to rob the bank? Yeah. So there's other underlying things that are happening there. So a consequence doesn't just fix a behavior. A consequence doesn't just stop things from happening. And a lot of times, the destroying of the classroom, the F-bombs that you hear kids throwing out, the throwing scissors at people or whatever it is, those things are just skills that they've used to express how they're feeling or their frustrations or whatever it is that they're struggling with in that moment. What maybe they haven't been taught is the skills they could be using. Maybe instead of throwing things everywhere, they can have different fidgets that they can throw in a special room. Maybe instead of wanting to hit somebody, they can use a weighted lap pad, or they can push something, or they can use a body sock, or whatever it is that's going to help them calm. They need to find replacement skills to help them through that. And if a kid comes in and destroys my classroom and I'm like, okay, now you're out of school suspended for 2 days, that teaches the kid absolutely nothing. That's where it does show that a skill needs to be taught. And until we start teaching that skill, I don't know how we ever expect kids to make a change in that.
Right.
And I think the best thing you can do for kids is real talk with them, obviously when they're regulated, but after they've had a big moment and they've destroyed a classroom or they've hurt someone or done something that wasn't safe that can get them in trouble. I think talking with them about those actions, I think there's different levels of how you can talk to them. I think your younger kids, obviously you don't go as in depth, but sometimes your third and fourth and fifth and all the way up, having a more real conversation is what will really help later on. I mean, I had a student that I was working with just recently, and that student had spit on an adult and was just being a stinker with this adult. And then would come and work with me and would be sweet as pie. And so I was realizing that maybe some of these behaviors were coming out because they wanted to work with a preferred adult. And sometimes that happens, right? And what I don't want to do is I don't want to accidentally reinforce negative behaviors. And so what I had ended up doing instead, when that student would come down to work with me, I had the adult that she was working with also come down. And I would say, oh, I'm really busy working on this, but I'll be here to help you guys in case something happens. And that was a really neat experience because rather than the para telling me what was happening or the student telling me what was happening, I was a bystander working. I was doing stuff to keep myself busy, so I didn't seem like I was really paying attention to what was happening. And when that student was being disrespectful and unkind, I could come in and I could say, hey, you know what? You never talk like that to me. What's going on here? And it kind of turned into a blame game where, the student might say, oh, well, she's not explaining it right. And I said, she would explain it just how I would. And then it allowed an opportunity for me to talk through, it doesn't matter if you feel like somebody's not explaining something the way you want to, or they're annoying you, or you're frustrated. You can't spit on an adult. You know what happens when you're 18 years old or even 16 years old and you spit on an adult and they tell somebody? The police get involved. And that's what I don't want for you. You can be mad. You can spit on the floor. You can spit in a garbage can. But the moment you start doing things like this, you could get yourself in trouble in the future. And we don't want to do that. So I think sometimes having those real conversations and making it more applicable to life and what happens can just make the light bulbs go off for kids. I also had a situation with a kid who really liked the F word. I mean, more than anything, and which is tricky because he was younger, but he's really smart and he knows what he's doing. But some kids might not have ever heard that word. And it wasn't enough for me to say, there's other kids that don't know that word. We don't want to teach them that word because it's not appropriate. That wasn't enough for this kid. And so the one day they're sitting down and I just go and sit by them and I said, what do you think would happen if I went to my principal and I said, this, I don't want to effing do this. And I didn't say the word, I just said this. And the kid looked at me like, just shocked that I would give that example to them. And I said, yeah, if I said that to my principal, guess who wouldn't have a job? Probably me. And that's what you have to think about. It's you're going to say the word. I can't stop you from saying the word, but you want to be an athlete someday. And the moment you start saying that word like that to people that are training you and helping you, you're going to lose your spot and you're not going to get to where you want to go in life. So I'm not saying this because I don't want you to say the word. You can choose what word you're going to say, but I want you to be the athlete. You're a leader. You're going to go so far, but if you are using language like that, you're going to lose your opportunity and that's not worth it. And that is the type of real talk that gets kids to start seeing, man, maybe I do need to start making some different choices. And there's so many different scenarios and situations you can kind of put in front of them as long as you truly know what that kid is motivated by and what they want to do in life.
I feel like this podcast with you, this interview, has been like one long example of comfort versus control.
Yeah, true.
When people are like,
but that's what it is.
Right? Because people are like, well, what does that mean? Or does it mean giving them whatever they want? Does it mean we can't say no? Or there's no consequences? I got to figure out, maybe that'll be a title for this, like comfort versus control. Like, tell me you're using comfort versus control without telling me. Right? That type of deal. So.
And I think I think it's true. And I think for those kids that desire control so much, there's a reason behind it, right? They didn't have the control that maybe they feel like they need in life. They've maybe had a lot of uncomfortable situations where they've just been grasping at straws to be able to have control over something. And so when they get the chance, they're going to take control over at any moment. And so that's where that choice language and those controlled choices are so important to help both parties succeed.
Yeah. Because honestly, we're the same way. Right? We've all gone through things, and people in general, staff, teachers, parents, everybody wants to feel in control. The question is, when we feel like things are going out of control, how we respond or how we react, right? That's what ends up making a difference from person to person.
Yeah. I just did a post actually on TikTok because there's trolls out there. So there was somebody being a little bit mouthy on TikTok and they had said the F word. And so I had just responded and said something along the lines of, like, if students see this, essentially remember what we talk about, right? We can't control how other people are going to react or the things they're going to do, but we can control how we're going to respond to that. And that's where we get to choose what we're going to do for our response. You know, are we going to be kind? Are we going to be graceful? Are we going to be unkind and say something super disrespectful back and get ourselves in trouble? And just kind of talking about that and referencing it again. But I think that's important.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time this morning and talking with me.
Yeah, it was fun.
I was told people that had trained you before, they're like, "Oh, you'll have no problem talking to her." And so it's been a good conversation with you. I appreciate it. How
I love these things.
how can people find you online if they want to see some of the posts and things that you do?
So my like main handles, especially sped. So on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you can find me with especially sped just by searching that. Miss China is my name that I go by on there. I also have a website, www.especiallysped.com, where I have a ton of different behavioral resources, trainings, blogs, things like that that people can also access.
All right. Well, Miss China, thank you. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Yep.
Bye.